First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining us again for the Worldview Matters Seminar. The purpose of this seminar, again, is to introduce you to the School of Biblical Christian Worldview, to give you a taste of certain elements of the school, specifically a taste of the teaching. However, the seminar participants also get a taste of the question and answer time in which we get the dialogue with the speaker. However, even more important than that is the time of roundtable dialogue, in which we come together and dialogue over a worldview matter that is common in today's world, and we seek to bring that worldview matter into obedience to Jesus. Today, we're very privileged to have Frank Bauer with us. He is from Germany, YWAM Germany. He is with the YWAM Urlaub base. He led the base for about 14 years. However, he's also been a teacher and leader of the School of Biblical Christian Worldview. I have always appreciated his teaching. He's always taught on postmodernism, and in a joking sort of way, but it's not really a joke. When he taught on postmodernism in our school back in 2019 or 2020, I think it was, I kind of felt like Frank was holding a mirror to my soul, a part of my soul I didn't realize I had. And so it showed me how much postmodernism I have inside me. And I think that as a lot of us learn about postmodernism, we will find that there's a lot more postmodernism in us than we would care to admit. And so this is one of the most important teachings, I think, because it really shows us a lot of the culture that we've taken in. And Frank has an excellent style. Unfortunately, today you're only going to get an introduction to postmodernism, about 40 minutes worth. But Lord willing, and at the end of the year, you'll get 4 to 5 days worth of it from Frank. So without further ado, I'll just pass it back to Frank and let him go with it. Thank you, Frank.
Yes, thank you, Josh. Well, it's a joy to be with you. And so I hope to see most of you or some of you in France then later on this year. Yeah. So that's exciting. Just to start out, we're looking at postmodernism, not to decide whether postmodernism is better than modernism or the years before, but more to see what is the world like that we live in, and how should we then live, to quote Francis Schaeffer. Yeah, how should we then engage in this world? What's collaborating with our worldview, with our biblical Christian worldview? What's maybe opposing it? And so Christianity often, or at least in the very beginning, has started to be a counterculture to the Jewish environment where Jesus lived. Yeah, he threw some of their rules not out, but challenged them and introduced a different perspective, a God perspective. And that's what we want to challenge ourselves with over and over again in the world that we live in, to see, hey, do we have a God perspective? Do we have Jesus perspective on our lives, on values, on the things, the ideologies, the ideas that are floating around, and to constantly evaluate and think about, hey, am I in sync with God's perspective, or am I doing my own thing, or am I influenced by the people and the culture around me? So that I need to be challenged to renew my mind and to renew my soul and to be in sync with what God is saying about myself and about this world and about the people around it. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, and not just to tickle our thoughts and our ideas and look at the latest trends, but to really think about, hey, how should we then live? What is God's answer for the brokenness in this world? What is God's answer for this lostness? And how does this affect my life? And how does this affect how I treat people? Yeah. So the title of our session is Postmodernism. And there's a subtitle. I'll get to that in a little bit. But before that, there is lots of discussion whether we are still in postmodernism or whether we moved on to a second or third modernism, or whether we are in meta-modernism or in postmodernism, and I don't want to talk about that discussion. It's clear that we've moved on from modernism, and we're still trying to define what's the time and era that we are entering. Yeah. So if you look at broad strokes of the history of thought, these things are not decided in 1 year to the next, but it's decided over a period of time. And as a Christian, I see the challenge for us to see, hey, let's think about what are God's answers. How can we influence this time that it will be a better time, that it will be a God time, that the kingdom of God is coming through more. Yeah. And that's our challenge. And so let's not get hung up on terms, but let's look at what this time and ideas are doing to our mind, to our society, and let's try and find honest, real God answers to the things that we can. And to some questions, it might be more difficult, and we need a little bit more time, and we need to wrestle with them. So the subtitle of our teaching was Deconstructing the Deconstructed Mind. When I read this, Josh, then I had to chuckle a bit, and I had to say, what on earth? What on earth is this? So we will talk about deconstruction, and I want to tell you that I want to start out with 3 stories, and then you will get more teaching for those who really want to get into philosophy. We will get there, but let me start with 3 stories. One is that I was just recently at a YWAM conference, and we had a discussion where 2 people were invited to talk about deconstruction. And I was part of the audience. I was actually part of the extended leadership of the conference, and I knew there was a discussion, but I didn't know where this would lead. And so they were talking about deconstruction, and there was this one YWAM guy that gave a testimony of how beautiful his deconstruction time was, and how he then rebuilt his faith. And I was in the audience, and I was puzzled. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, if you look at classical deconstruction, it leads to nothing. Yeah, it needs to questions and doubt and into nothingness, and we'll explore that. But there has been a little bit of trend which I'm following up now, since it surprised me, that in some circles, well, definitely in the secular world, deconstruction is looked at something that's very positive. Yeah, it's mixed up with renewal or questioning the status quo and breaking things down. And there has been a trend a bit that Christians, especially evangelicals, are or post evangelicals are going through a time of deconstruction where they are saying we want to get rid of wrong church rules and concepts and faith concepts and deconstruct our belief and our thinking to be pure of that, whatever that means. And so there is a new trend that's going on that's promoting that. And I'm looking at it and going like, let's be a little bit careful with that. Because deconstruction, as I know it, often goes into a dead end. And so I want to caution you and us to that, to say, hey, let's be careful in what we engage with and what we allow and what we cheer on. And let's look at it a little bit closer, which is what we will do in the next half hour. So in that, we see that in postmodernity, we already have, like, postmodernity classically is defined by a constant change. By a constant change where progress is no longer. Yeah, there's a belief that progress has come to an end, like we will not have progress on and on and on and in every area of life, which is the most important value of modernism, that there is progress and that we will live in progress. And so modernity is saying that has come to an end, and we don't have progress, we have constant change in all areas, in values, in ideas, in how we live, in what we do, and we will see how that affects all of life. And so postmodernity is saying we don't have that progress, but we have that constant change. Yeah. And so this interview, or in this YWAM conference, caught me a bit by surprise. And so I was thinking more about deconstruction and how we really also need to prepare ourselves and people to engage in that discussion and to not make mistakes. And that leads me to my second example, or second story. I have a friend, and this friend of mine worked with us in YWAM for many years, and grew up in a fine Christian family, and was working and engaged in missions. And just a few months ago, I got a letter from her, and she's a really very dear family friend. They have kids our age, and she wrote me, "It's been about a year now since I stopped trying to act like a Christian. I needed to take some time to be away from it and just leave. And just live. I kind of wanted to know what questions would come up and what would I miss about it. It turns out there is not much I miss. All my life, I have been some sort of evangelical, and there have been a lot of good things about that." And then she goes on talking about her life. And it really shocked me, because she, she's a very good friend. We did mission trips together. We worked together. We did worked in a church together on different projects. She taught Bible and all kinds of things. And I'm puzzled in how she so easily walks away from her faith and just abandons it and says, "Oh, I'm not missing any of that." And And some of that, I think, is what's going on also with the deconstruction under Christians that say, hey, I'm deconstructing evangelicalism, I'm deconstructing, and in the States, that's a bit more complicated than in other areas, because in the States, there is a lot of politicalness mixed into evangelicalism and evangelical lingo, which you don't have so much in Europe. I'm not sure about Asia, how that is. But where a lot of people are asking, hey, do I want to be identified with this? Is this me, or who am I? And all these questions of identity come up. Let me share my PowerPoint with you. Can you see that now? Okay, so third story is this guy, David Kinnaman. He is the president of Barna Institute, who is doing most of the Christian surveys, or the biggest Christian surveyor worldwide and in the States. And he wrote a book, You Lost Me. And in his book, he has a chart where he describes that there is a huge engagement of young people in church until they're 17, and when they leave home and when they leave, go away to study or to live by themselves, when they're around 18 to 20, then there is a huge disengagement in faith and in church. And he's saying only some of these people then eventually come back into church. And the question he poses is, like, how can we have so many engaged people growing in faith, being engaged in youth group, and then when they leave for studies, they drop out and they enjoy it? Yeah, it's just like my friend who had been a Christian and acting like a Christian, as she says, and then all of a sudden says, oh, I'm enjoying just to live and not having to perform a certain way or fit my own expectations or other people's expectations. And so a lot of these young people drop out, and Kinnaman says only some of them come back. Like, one of his statistics is actually that 59% of all believers like drop out of church at some point, and only some come back eventually. But to have a 59% dropout rate, that, like, we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong? What's wrong here? Yeah. Also to see how are we training our young people that until they're 18, 20, and then their faith is not strong enough, or the temptations of life, or the hunger of life is so big that they say, I want to leave this behind and I want to do something else. Yeah. And there are some honest questions where we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong as a church, or as Christians, and how can we equip people better? Like, not in creating more rules or rigid religiosity or an evangelicalism, but how can we introduce people to life, the life that God created, the life that God wants us to live, with the joys and the fears and the tears and the sorrows and the good relationships and the sustainability throughout it. And so I think there, we as Christians really need to do some good homework, to see how can we better prepare people and engage people with a holistic view of the Christian life, with a perspective of life, and with a life that they live where they say, I love this, I don't want to leave this, I miss this, you know, this is what I'm living for and what I'm dying for. Yeah, and so these three things really brought me to think, hey, how do we need to engage better with people, and how do we need to know what's going on in the world that we can guard against it and bring young people through, or give the life opportunities to people that they long for. And so I want to quickly dive into postmodernism and how it and the value of deconstruction. I think deconstruction is the most critical thing that is coming out of postmodernism. Like it's also almost a mechanism, or a mechanism that postmodernism produces, that's attacking, for the good and the bad, all areas of lives and values. And so we will look at truth, because truth is something that's important, kind of, at least if we believe in God, and if we believe that he is the truth. And so I want to run you through this very quickly, because I think it gives a great definition of what we're up against. Yeah, and what's driving postmodernism. And I think this is really underestimated, what impact this has. And if we understand this, then we can understand these three stories a little bit better that I shared in the beginning. So Jean Edward Feit is a Lutheran theologian, and he wrote a book called Postmodern Times. The original copy is called Guide to Contemporary Culture, but he revised it, and so and so. And so he originally made a study about absolutes. Yeah, and so absolutes are about truth. If you think anything is absolute, then this is absolute. You believe this is true, and there's nothing around it, and it's not true just for you, but it's true for anyone. And so this was years ago, even, where he said 66% of Americans at that time believed in that there is no absolute truth. So this trend was already going on, where people believed there's no absolute truth. Yeah. And the young people, that was even higher. The percentage, 72%, believe there's no absolute truth. Now, Feit says something really remarkable. And this is, if you take only this from this hour, then you've already won a treasure. To disbelieve in truth is, of course, self-contradictory. To believe means to think something is true. To say it's true that nothing is true is intrinsic, meaningless nonsense. The very statement, there is no absolute truth, is an absolute truth. Yeah. And so we see a shift from modernism to postmodernism, where the new absolute, the new doctrine is that there is no absolute truth. And people are saying that this is absolute. Yeah. They're not saying it's absolute because it's nonsense. Yeah. But this is the new guideline. Yeah. This is the new dogma, that there is no absolute truth, which throws us into spin, because then there is no truth, there is no, if there's no truth, then meaning gets lost, then it gets really difficult in communications. if I can trust anything anymore. And so we could explore that, but that's a whole other thing. But for now, we recognize that the trend is people believe that there's no absolute truth anymore, and that's rising, and which is actually a new absolute, that you cannot say anymore that I believe, well, you can say it, but you're not it's not politically correct. I believe in God, and this God is not just my God, but it's the God of all the earth. It's the God of the universe. Yeah. Where people say this, there is no absolutes anymore. If God is God, then he is your God. And he can be your God, but for other people, there is something else. Yeah. Which totally conflicts with what we believe. Because if we believe in God, that he created the universe, then he did, and he is absolute. And we need to believe that he is absolute. Then he is God for me and for you, and also for the people that don't believe in him, but he is still God. Yeah. And our society and culture is saying you're not allowed really to say that anymore. You're not allowed to think that anymore, because you make yourself superior, or then they come with the big words of imperialism and colonization of ideas and these kind of things. But we have to recognize what Veit says, that to disbelieve in truth is self-contradictory. To believe means something is true. It's true that nothing is true is intrinsic, meaningless nonsense. The very statement there is no absolute truth is an absolute truth. So postmodernism, the term, was coined by the philosopher Jean-François Lyotard, and he connected this definition and this shift to the immense access of information availability. And so he says that's a characteristic of our time. Yeah, there's more information that we can deal with. There is a information overload. There's an information explosion. If we look for anything, we Google it, and we have a million answers and not just one. And that's also, a trend that we have, that there is not just one answer, but there is 100 answers or 100 approaches, and questions get more important than answers, because you have many answers. His book, Postmodern Knowledge, Lyotard sees how the authority of the big ideas, which are called meta-narratives or ideological rational systems, at the end of the 20th century breaks into fragment in order to leave only smaller elements of purpose. Now, that's a bit a mouthful, I understand, but I'll explain that. It's very simple. So this is very recommended reading, the book Postmodern Knowledge from Lyotard. This is how it started. But it's very difficult to read because it's not very rational. Yeah, and that's what postmodernism is. Yeah, it's more feeling and ideas and options, and and so it's like I found it very difficult to read. Probably many of you are much more academic than I, and you can get this easily, but but I struggled with it because it's not congruent. It doesn't make total sense, and in postmodernity it doesn't need to make sense. But this very statement makes a lot of sense, and where Lyotard kind of explains what's going on in postmodernism. And that has to do with deconstruction. He is saying the big ideas of this world, the big ideologies, the rational systems. Yeah, modernism was the the birthing place of communism, of rationalism, of capitalism. These big ideas, they are losing their authority. They don't have authority anymore, and they are breaking down into fragments. And so underlining postmodernity actually encourages the breaking down of these meta-narratives. Meta means beyond, and narrative is a story. So it's the big stories of this time, the big ideologies. They are breaking down, and they need to be broken down into smaller elements, into fragments, because Lyotard says that only these fragments can give you purpose. You cannot achieve the long story of the big ideas. You cannot follow that purpose all the way. It's too big for us. Therefore, we need to break it down and be fulfilled in the smaller elements of purpose. And that's the process of deconstruction, of breaking down ideas, values, ideologies into smaller fragments, which leaves us in the end with no purpose, with only a cup of coffee to enjoy with my friend. Yeah, which is good. But if that's what all of life is about, maybe that's a bit meaningless after all. Yeah. But that's what postmodernity is doing. And so to make that even more practical, for example, if I vowed to my wife that I will be with you in good times and in bad times until death parts us. Yeah, that's my marriage vow to Heidi, my wife. Yeah, like that's a big goal. That's a big story, a big idea, saying, hey, I don't know what's coming up, honey, but I will stick it out with you. Yeah. And so postmodernism is saying, oh, that's a really big idea. You shouldn't make that commitment. We should break it down for you into smaller fragments, smaller elements of purpose that are fulfillable for you. So maybe you can commit for just 5 years, and then you reevaluate if you want to be still together and share your life, or one of you could get sick and then it's really uncomfortable, or to be together, and so it's better to split up, or different reasons. Yeah. And so our time is saying, whoa, don't follow the big ideas, make it smaller so that it's fulfillable. Yeah. And yes, marriage and this idea to be together, that's a big idea. It's a big commitment. And I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I'm committed to say, hey, I'm there. Yeah. I know this is a little bit beyond myself, but I'm there and I'm in. I'm all in. Yeah. And postmodernity is saying, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that because it's all breaking down and it's not fulfillable anymore. And so that's the value and the process of deconstruction that postmodernism brings. This book, Fight Road, there's a very funny example on how he describes the shift from modernism to postmodernism, and it's very symbolic. But it's funny, and he says, according to Charles Jenks, the end of modernism and the beginning of postmodernism took place at 3:32 p.m. on July 15th, 1972. At that moment, the Puigo housing development in St. Louis, a pinnacle of modern architecture, was blown up. Yeah, this was the architecture in Puigo, housing development, and this won a prize under modernism because it was so efficient, so big, so nice, new, and it won an architectural prize. And in 72, it actually was demolished and exploded because they found out people were depressed. The houses, apartments were all the same. There was no parks, there was no playground. It was crime-ridden. The police was unable to secure and patrol it really good. And so they said, it's unlivable and it's not serving our society. We blow it up. And so they blew it up. What won a prize under modern architecture? In postmodernity, we find out this is not livable. It's not serving us, and we just blow it up. We deconstruct it. So fight continues. Demolition of the pre-ego development is a paradigm for postmodernism. The modern worldview constructs rationally designed systems in which human beings find it impossible to live. This paradigm applies not so much to housing projects, but more to philosophical systems and ways of life. The new secular solution, however, is not only to blow modernism to smithereens, but to explode all stable structures, including Christianity. So Veit says, watch out. Postmodernism is destroying these unlivable things. For example, what we find difficult in, for example, evangelicalism. Yeah. So postmodernism will deconstruct it for you and help you to get rid of all these things that you don't want to be identified with because it's uncomfortable or because it's wrong, or yeah. And then it leaves you with no answer, with nothing. But it will attack these things as well, and not just modernism, which we are opposed to as well as Christians. When we say, hey, modernism is not God, yeah, it's not Christianity. It's also a set of values where human being was the end of all answers or rationality. But we believe in God, who lives with us and who gives us revelation, who gives us purpose. So Veit continues in that and says, if you look at this housing development and we think about not just the housing, but the ideas that postmodernism attacks, instead of erecting some other structure on the rubble, secular postmodernism concentrates on the explosion. Most postmodern theorists refuse to provide a more habitable alternative. The low-income inhabitants of pre-ego housing project no longer have to live in a sterile, inhumane structure. Under postmodern ways of thinking, now they can be homeless. And that's exactly what postmodernism does and what deconstruction does. It deconstructs and breaks down, but it refuses, the main thinkers refuse to give an alternative to build up on. And they leave you hanging in the deconstruction, and they free you from this uninhabitable structure, unlivable systems, or uncomfortable systems, or wrong systems, but they don't give you an alternative and they leave you homeless. And so Veit says, and that's not just for the housing complex, but it's intellectually as well, worldview-wise as well. Postmodernism will deconstruct your worldview, your evangelicalism, or whatever worldview you have, and will leave you hanging homeless. And postmodernism has not been able to create an alternative. The problem is that other people and a lot of other fractions are there to give you alternatives. Yeah. And the question is, you know, what will the world choose? What will young people choose? What kind of alternatives? But in the first period, postmodernism leaves them hanging in nothing. It leaves them on the rubble of what they have believed before. And they're confused, they're homeless intellectually, they don't know where to go, they broke off relationships. And it's, remember the story of my friend. It's walking away from something, not missing anything, but not arriving anywhere. And it leaves people homeless and alone. And that's the danger of deconstruction and postmodernism. And so as a church, we have to challenge ourselves, or as honest believers, what alternative are we offering people? And so it's a very vulnerable time for people, but a very important time to think about alternatives, to think of beliefs, ideas that give them a new home, a home that's livable, that makes sense, that's satisfactory, and that gives them, again, a bigger purpose than the next vacation or the next cup of coffee or the next little fragment of purpose. How are we doing time-wise? Okay, deconstruction. Just a little bit. I'll skip some of that just because of time. Deconstruction originally comes from a literature study. It started in literature where people were saying, hey, we look at a certain book or a text from anyone, and then we look at it from different angles and deconstruct that text. We don't take it at face value anymore, but we consider the background of the author, the background of the interest group that he writes for. We consider the political culture. We consider if it's a male or female that wrote it, which ethnicity is it promoting. What would homosexuals think if they read such an article? And we look at it from all kinds of angles and consider all these things, and then look at the meaning of the text, if that could be said or not said, or how it could be understood. And that system and method of deconstruction in literature led to that you cannot take anything for face value anymore. And everything that's said is kind of coming apart and getting into thin air, where you cannot grab truth anymore or say, this is really what it means. No, it could mean this. If I'm looking at it from a female African perspective, I understand this. Yeah. And so everything becomes arbitrary. Truth and even opinion becomes more watered down and less valued. And so that's how deconstruction started in the area of literature, but then it widened its method to all of life, basically, to philosophy and to values that are challenged, and the way you live, what you think, and it's almost like a little virus that attacks all stable structures and breaks them down with you and for you. The problem is, in the end, it leaves you homeless, because postmodernism is not giving a proper, stable, functioning alternative, at least not yet. And so this would also be a chance for us as Christians to say, hey, let's introduce a biblical Christian worldview to give that purpose, to give that stability. Yeah. So this is kind of interesting, just to prove that point again. Well, in philosophy, we then get to the deconstruction of the subject, and the subject is knowing who you are in philosophy. Yeah, it's not about the subject that we talk about in grammar, but it's the subject is you and who you are, and that you know who you are. It's your identity. Yeah. And where deconstruction then arrives in deconstructing who you are. And if the subject is deconstructed, then you have no perspective of objectivity. Yeah. The object is not clear anymore, and you don't have a perspective of truth anymore. You don't have an outside reference anymore. You're only left to your own ideas and your own feelings. You don't know who you are. And we have a loss of objectivity, and we have a loss of truth in there. Everything is in the air. It's all options, and it's all open for interpretation, and it's all relative. Just one example. For example, in philosophy, Heidegger, a German philosopher, was very much into deconstruction and these things. He's very praised amongst a lot of people. At the end of his life, he wrote, or he wrote on a book or a thesis to say, hey, he wants to undergo the task of deconstruction of the history of ontology. Now, that's a bit a mouthful as well. The ontology is the question of who am I, but also the question of where we come from. So, which eventually, as good worldview students, you know, that's the question about God, you know, who made everything. And so Heidegger was saying, we need to break this apart, how people have answered this question so far. We're attacking and deconstructing the history of ontology, of how people have answered the question where we're coming from. We're questioning that, we're taking that apart, and these answers are no longer valid. Yeah, and it's taking away all tradition, all past, all what we build on. It's taking away God. It's taking away the Christian faith and the Christian tradition and other worldview traditions as well, saying that how these questions of ontology or cosmology or teleology have been answered is no longer valid. We're breaking it apart, and we're looking at it with a clean slate from anew, and we're deciding how we want it to be, what we want it to be. Yeah. And so that's just an outcome of how far this deconstruction goes. It doesn't stop with looking at a literary text. It goes into what we think, and eventually what we feel, and how we feel about ourselves, what we think about ourselves and the other people around us. That very quickly leads to an identity crisis, where people don't know who they are anymore. They don't know where they come from. That has been deconstructed. Yeah, it's not valid anymore. It doesn't matter who your parents are. It doesn't matter which race you are. It's all a clean slate. And people are forcing you to develop who you are. Where young people now need to construct and invent their identity. Before, we had a concept that you actually are someone and you can discover your identity. You can find it out. You can find out what's inside of you, who God made you to be, and what potential you have, and discover that and get to know that. Now, young people have the burden to invent who they are, to design afresh who they want to be. And they have a million trials and a million frustrations to try and find out who they are. And they cannot find it out because they never get the connection to the creator who actually made them a certain way and affirms them and leads them on. So young people are pressed down by a burden of creating their own identity. So they have to, Ron Kupsch, a German philosopher, says, people are freed and damned to become the architect of their own lives. Yeah. So it's a freedom, but it's also a curse because it's too big for us. And we've never been made for that because we have been made by God with certain potential, with certain values, with a certain identity that he made us to be, where he said, hey, walk in this and you will be happy. You will be fulfilled. You can make your contribution. You have a bigger purpose. Yeah. So David Precht, he's the most famous present German philosopher right now. He wrote a book recently that says, who am I? And if so, how many? Yeah. And so for him, that's a bit humorous as well, where he explores that. But that's really also the where he hits a nerve of our time, where people don't know who they are anymore. They don't know who they want to be, and they fall into different roles that they play. Or, you know, one time I'm this identity, and then I switch to another identity. You know, how many people do I want to be? And people define themselves with different identity to different groups, and so on. Just one quick thought to Gen Zers and a lot of young people now, you know, they do have a really fresh perspective on life. You know, coming out of this, hey, everything has been deconstructed, and I'm here now. And some of them are very convinced of themselves, and they have an approach to life to always look, how does that serve me? What can I get out of this? And so even if they go for a job interview or so, they would ask, hey, what's my benefit if I work for you? Or, yeah, there's a very much an approach of me and what can I get out, not what I can contribute, but what can I get out? So that's very interesting. And there's a lot of confidence in young people, which is not just bad. Some of it is really good, and there is also, you know, a hope and a great potential, as there is in any generation, to say, hey, if God comes into this generation, they can really whoop it. They can really make a difference. If they know who they are and they put their mind to work, they don't want to just hang out. Yeah, they want to make a difference. To make a difference in all of it is a bit too big for them because their big goals have been deconstructed, but they look at causes that they want to follow, and they're faithful to it, and they want to see it to the end. So there's a hunger inside to fulfill a purpose, to make a contribution, and to engage. And so that's also a momentum that can really serve a new revival and a new reformation if we can provide the right framework, and God gives his spirit and what he needs to give to make that happen. Yeah. Just to close up, in his book You Lost Me, Kinnaman gives quite quite some good hints of how he says we need to approach this new rising generation that's growing up in postmodernism, which I think he finds some really good keys in it. One thing he says, every story matters. Yeah, every story matters. Saying that he wouldn't describe these as millennials or Gen Zers, but he says, they are mosaics. They are like little stones. They're all individuals, but they're ready to form a bigger picture if you give them the frame. And I find that quite interesting. I find that a very good description, saying, hey, they're not like the baby boomers that says, I am it and I can do it and da. But they say, hey, I'm a little piece, yeah, and I can do something, and I want to be a part of a bigger picture, which is a very Christian thought, yeah. And we can make that of use, but it also means that, every story matters. Everyone is individualistic. The approach of modernism to say, hey, the big crusades and you all need to pray this prayer and you all need to do it this way to follow Jesus doesn't work anymore. People want personal engagement, they want personal attention, they want discipleship, they want you being there, they want mentorship. How mentorship has increased in the years, where people are asking, hey, I want help, I want coaching, I need that, I thrive with it, and these people are open for it, and that's a real chance to really walk with people, yeah. Where people are open for relationship and they're open for mentorship. And so now my PowerPoint is stuck, I think. Yeah, let me see. Just to close up. So Kinnaman also sees a new opportunity and to reconsider how to make disciples, that we as a church consider, hey, how do we do that? And so I think our DTSs and different discipleship concepts are very key for this time. Also to give individual attention to the people, that they do not drop out of faith once they hit university. How can we walk with them also when they leave their home or when they leave church to enter something new? What are the networks that they can be connected to and engaged with? And so with the technology that we have, and with Zoom and other things, this is made much easier for us, to keep those connections and to keep people engaged. So of course, we need to connect people to God again and give them the real sense of, they're not alone in this, but God is there. And he's not just a personal God, but he is the God who was and is to come. He is there tomorrow. No matter what tomorrow brings, God is there, and he is the same. He is that stable factor that's always there. No matter how I feel and what I do, if I sin or if I am full of joy, God is there. And he loves me no matter what. He is there, and he's there tomorrow. And that's what people need to hear, and that's what we need to emphasize in our schools, in our way of life, you know, to give people that stability in us and also in our faith, that this will lead into the future, that God is there. That concept of fatherhood, of motherhood, of, you know, someone that's there tomorrow, no matter what you do. And as a father, you know, that's very simple. Yeah. If you have a child, you love your child. And even if your child messes up, you still love it. Yeah. And no matter what consequences there are, you love your child. Yeah. And God even more is like that. And he is there for you. And for all these searching people that are walking away, or they are dropping out, or they're looking for life, let's walk with them and keep introducing them to the God that's relationship, that's there for them, that's in the relationship with me and the others, and that's there for us tomorrow as well. We are his. We are not just our own. We're not just this piece of mosaic, but we give together with all the others. There's a beautiful picture that will lead into eternity. Amen.